Do 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 do. Extras! Here's some more stuff. The dwarves. DeCorso's chasm is at the northern extreme of Tark, the dwarven nation. Long, long ago, the dwarves all lived in vast underground cities within 3 mountains further north, in a mountain range known as the Iron Sea. But about 1100 years ago, during a great conflict we call the Shatter War, 2 of those cities were wiped out, and the third of them was greatly diminished. Since that catastrophe, the dwarves have abandoned the mountains and moved out into this large southern land, about the size of Texas. The leaders of the dwarven families became independent feudal lords, and they formed a fairly ruthless, competitive, mercantile society. The Dons are renowned for scheming, scamming, and outmaneuvering each other, but without violence. In fact, if any outsider threatens dwarves, the staunchest competitors will band together against that threat, just as they have banded together against the Diluvian Empire. Don DeCorso himself is quite typical. He's greedy, even miserly in business, and yet generous to his friends and allies. He wants wealth, so he can use it to benefit his family, friends, and supporters. I don't know why I gave them such confused Southern European-inspired nomenclature mixed in with standard dwarfiness. I just did. Fellow travelers. While on the highway, they passed some other traffic. Apart from a few boring groups, they passed one wagon full of heavily armored dwarves asking questions about the chasm. It turns out that one of them was son of the famous armorsmith Don Hammerer, Lord of Stormpost to the east. The son, Harold, was responding to a request Don DeCorso had put out to nearby dwarfholds to help him defend the dimensional portals from the Drow Mines. It was supposed to be temporary aid because Draven and DeCorso's own wizard are pretty sure the Drow portals will shrink down and close on their own, since nobody's forcing the Feltree through the dimensional rifts anymore. DeCorso is also short of guards because a bunch of them went with his steward to retrieve the third spoon, though they should be back pretty soon. Anyway, Harold Hammerer here asks the players a whole bunch of questions, just trying to make sure that the invasion is real, to make sure DeCorso isn't jerking him around somehow. But the PCs assured him that the danger was real. After all, they were the ones who discovered it. At one point, they also passed by what appeared to be a trio of adventurers. A halfling marshal with bulky gauntlets, a very muscular barbarian-looking guy, and a dragonborn in gray robes. But nothing happened. They just nodded as they passed, because this was just a flavor encounter to show that the PCs weren't necessarily the only bunch of weirdos riding around doing quests and stuff. Dragonborn? So, Little One is the son of a dragon and a human. That makes him technically a half-dragon, though he came out way closer to his human side, genetically speaking anyway. That is not to be confused with the Dragonborn, who are like the 4th edition race with a different history. They look like humanoid dragons, snouts, scales, and all, in the same sense that the Kuo-toa look like humanoid fish. In our setting, powerful dragons live mostly on the other 2 continents, and these dragons created the Dragonborn to be a race of servants. And for a long time they were, as the dragons mostly fought petty wars with each other over territory or treasure, or just lounged around growing fat and complacent. The Dragonborn worshipped the dragons for quite a while, because that's what they were made to do. But eventually they began talking to each other, secretly educating themselves, and they quietly decided that the dragons were a bunch of fat immortal a-holes. So the servants started acting extra super nice to lull some of the masters into a false sense of security, and after generations of planning and training, they rose up, killed a few of the dragon lords, and drove the rest of them off the 3rd continent. And they called their new nation Freeborn, and they were all happy until a couple centuries later, about 50 years before present day, when the dragons came back, and they brought Dragonborn Death Knights with them, and exterminated most of the uppity servants, such that only a few hundred Dragonborn survived, making it to the Eladrin coast on shoddy, ramshackle rafts. Now they are refugees and outcasts, though out of their very small numbers, more than a few turned to mercenary work. The White Deer. When they were riding down the road towards the rendezvous with Bob, carrying the chest with the rod inside, they spotted that chromatic white so white it looked 2-dimensional deer, and once it was clear they had seen it, it trotted into the woods. And they ignored it. Oh sure, they were intrigued, very curious, but some of them were concerned that it was a trap, like a super duper mega obvious trap that they shouldn't fall for. Angel in particular was very concerned that someone wanted to steal the chest so they couldn't trade it for the spoon, and they all agreed that they did not want to risk screwing up the deal. So a few minutes later, the deer reappeared, following alongside them about 20 feet from the road, and when it had their attention, it ducked into the woods again, somewhat more slowly, and leaving chromatic white footprints that faded after a few seconds. But now it was clearly trying too hard to suck them in, and they totally weren't falling for that. So they kept riding for about 15 minutes more, and then the deer showed up for the third time, and it acted pretty much the same as the second try. But in my head, I was like, this is the very last try. If they don't go for it this time, it'll be too late. White tree spirit thing gets squashed, and no Warforged robot lumberjack encounter. But Draven couldn't stand it anymore. He just had to know what the heck this was, even if it was just some stupid illusion and a trap. And Little One didn't care either way, investigate it or ignore it. And Angel really didn't want to risk the chest, but she was like, fine, fine. And that's how, in the end, they got the full lumberjack experience. And that was a pretty interesting encounter to me, because I figured they could maybe talk their way out of it by asking all kinds of questions about the creators of the Warforged, or maybe they would just smash it, though it would have hit back pretty hard. And because I didn't have a real rigid concept in my head for how this encounter would go, when Draven came up with a whole different way to talk through it, I was like, cool, and went with it. Anyway, that's it for this installment of Extras. Drop me a question below, subscribe to my Twitter at TailsDDC, or if you care about the stats for things, check out the forums. I've already posted the stats for the stuff they fought in the Drow Mines, and I'll add the Lumberjack stats soon enough.